Hi, everyone. Hope you're doing well. I'm sure that many of you are interested in consulting, but are probably concerned about the current economic period and some of the rumors around consulting applications. The reality is that consulting firms are now hiring less than they used to before, and they're tougher on who they take through the screening process. And this session is meant to explain to you how to build an end-to-end strategy for your consulting applications in order to maximize your chances of getting at least an offer. So let's begin. To start with, briefly about what I do. I'm an ex-McKinsey consultant with around 5 years of tenure. I was fortunate enough to come from a target school, which made it easier to get into McKinsey. However, I didn't have a business background, so I face many of the challenges that non-traditional candidates have around having to get comfortable with business terms and business cases. This might explain why I also had a relatively awful start in consulting. I was almost counseled to leave towards the end of my first year, and I had to spend quite a bit of effort seeking mentorship and understanding the feedback that I was receiving and trying to work on it. And fortunately, I managed to turn the situation around and then become a top quartile performer, which made the remaining 4 years in the firm a lot more enjoyable and was an amazing learning experience. I then left McKinsey around 2 years ago with creative ambitions to become a writer and coach, and I set up my own entity called Path to Consulting. In terms of my stats as a coach on PrepLounge, I'm rated as the #1 coach for McKinsey. I have a 100% success rate for candidates who interviewed at least 3 firms. I've worked with almost 200 candidates by now. What I focus on is trying to coach mindset, not frameworks. In McKinsey, I was also leading some of the cohort trainings in Europe for new joiners. This is a 1-week training that happens in McKinsey right when consultants join. And I was working with new joiners and trying to teach them the problem-solving techniques that McKinsey consultants use. I try to do the same with my own candidates. The idea being that you are not preparing for the interview, you're also preparing for the job as a consultant. And then if you manage to adopt the right mindset, then the interview itself will be relatively easy by comparison. I also try to work in an iterative fashion on a strengths-based development framework. So that means that there's no set curriculum. The way I work with candidates is fully adapted to each individual candidate. And then we see how you evolve, and then we try to adjust constantly the development plan in that direction. And I'm also fully transparent in terms of my results. I publish an annual report, which shows all the candidates that I've worked with. Of course, the names are sanitized, but then also with a clear indication of the firms that they went on to work, and how many offers they got and where. So that's in short about me and what I do. Now let's get into the meat of things. So the purpose for today's session is to provide as much value as possible for free as I can in 30 to 45 minutes. And the main questions that we'll seek to answer in this webinar is, what is the best step-by-step approach to maximize your chances of getting at least one consulting offer? Then where and why the most candidates fail in the recruitment process, and how to leverage coaching in the smartest and most cost-effective way. If you have any other questions that would be critical to cover, feel free to drop them in the chat, and these can be discussed at the end as part of the Q&A. Now, let's take a step back. So basically, this image gives you a glimpse into the recruitment funnel. So many of you already know that for the top consulting firms, the average success rate for a candidate is around 1%. What that realistically means is that out of 100 people who apply, barely one gets an offer. Of course, for the less competitive firms, there's a higher percentage, but we can just take this percentage for now as an indication that reflects, in particular, McKinsey, BCG, and Bain. Now, along this process, there are three main filters. There's usually the first filter, which is around screening. So this is where they review the CV and the cover letter. We can also include here the referral, which is usually judged together with the CV and then cover letter in case you have a referral from a current employee, as well as the screening test. In the majority of markets, the way it works is that as long as your application package, meaning CV and cover letter, and potentially referral, fulfill the minimum criteria, then you're automatically sent the test. And then your application is judged across all of these elements at the end. And then they decide basically whether to get to filter 2, which is the interview round. After you pass the first round of interviews, you get to the second round of interviews. And this is also where they then decide whether to give you an offer or not. Depending on the firm, there could be 3 rounds of interviews. There could be just 1. Typically within 1 round of interviews, there are 2 standalone interviews, but there could also be 3. So of course there are variations, but this is high level, the typical process. So the way it used to look is that there were like 100 candidates entering the funnel, and 20 of them would reach round 1. And then out of these, maybe 4 would reach round 2. And then out of these 4, 1 would get the offer. Needless to say, these are not official numbers that I just downloaded from McKinsey's database for the past 40 years. This is a lot based on the empirical knowledge that I've collected also working with candidates and what I've observed in the industry. So take these as directional numbers, but just to give you an idea of the shape of the funnel and the main conversion rates along the funnel. Now, as I was explaining in the beginning, of course, you know that over the past 2 years, consulting firms have hired massively, sort of post-COVID rush. And now they found themselves in the situation where the economy is contracting. They have a lot of people. They can't staff these people. They're, in McKinsey, we used to say they sit on the beach. It doesn't make sense to hire more people. If anything, they would like to have a much smaller number of employees at this point, a smaller number of consultants. So as a consequence, they're now just hiring less than before. Let me show you what this means. So if in the past you would have maybe 100 to 20 to then 4 and then 1 person getting the offer, now what I noticed is that rather out of 100, you maybe have like 10 that actually get to invited to the first round. So this first filter got significantly narrower. Then after they pass here, the first round, actually the conversion rates stay rather similar. Like it's not a significant jump. It's pretty much the same as before. So once again, if we take a step back, what this means is that it's not so much that the interviewing standards of these firms changed. What changed rather are the expectations that they have in terms of the people they're willing to interview in the first place. So they've become really tough on screening, which then makes it super important to have a really great application package and to have a very good strategy right from the beginning. And this will then ensure that you make it to the first round. And then as long as you're one of the good candidates, you're then likely to get an offer. Good. So moving on. What can you actually do with this? Yeah, there's a lot of stuff that you cannot do. You can't influence the economic fluctuations. You can't influence the changes in the recruitment process, the lack of clarity as to when firms freeze hiring, when firms reply to applications, what are hiring quotas, rising hiring standards. All of these things, realistically, you can't influence. And funnily enough, this is what 80 to 90% of people spend time talking about. So these are, of course, things that have an influence on you, but realistically, you as the candidate can't do much about. So what can you do? From my point of view, there are 5 things that you can do, and I just want to focus the discussion today on these. These are basically, you can influence your application strategy, you can influence your application pack, meaning CV, cover letter, and so on. Then third, you can work on networking and getting referrals. Fourth is the interview performance. And fifth is an enabler, which is working with a coach. The main point that I'm trying to make here is that even though firms are hiring less for the reasons that I was just explaining, they are still taking in new people. I still currently have candidates that are interviewing at the moment that are getting offers. So for sure, these firms are still seeking to refresh their, let's say, base of candidates as other employees leave, but they're not doing at the volume that they were doing maybe 2 years ago. So then the objective is to make sure that you are really among the best of candidates so that you can get at least one offer, or ideally several, so you can choose from them. Good. So let's jump into the first one. The application strategy is something that realistically all candidates should have, but I've also noticed that only 10% of them do. The reality of the job search is that it's like 90% preparation, and then it's 10% luck. Funnily enough, like many things in life. So you can't control for everything that might go wrong, but it's great to control for the things that you can control, that are within your power. There will be unexpected opportunities and failures along the way. So you just need to set up a system that positions you in the best way to achieve your overall target. Yeah. So there are a lot of elements that go into this, and I try to synthesize them to the main principles that you should have in mind when you attempt to set up this sort of strategy. So the first thing is to diversify. I know that many people have this target. I want to apply only to MBB. I want only McKinsey or only BCG or only Bain, whatever. The smart thing to do is to actually apply widely. Don't go for 2-3 firms, but go to 8 to 12, maybe more. In the recruitment process, many unfortunate things can happen. So your application maybe gets overlooked. There's a slight possibility for this. Maybe there's an issue with your CV, maybe there's an issue with your referral, maybe there's an issue with scheduling, whatever. But realistically, out of the 4 firms that you're applying at, you end up only interviewing with 1. And then regardless of how prepared you are, if you don't perform well on the day, then you sort of lost the game, and you've invested all this time and effort, but because you didn't have a significant pool of firms to interact with, then you're left with none at the end. The second point is around creating transparency. So make sure that you create an overview early on of all the firms that you want to apply to. What is the target role? What are the deadlines? Who's the main contact? Who are the potential referrals, and so on. I often work with this with candidates. It's a way for both of us to have an understanding of where they are in the process and how many firms they're targeting. And the earlier you manage to get this sort of overview for yourself, the better, because then it really gives you an understanding of what you're working on. Thirdly, try to sequence, so apply in batches, starting first with the firms that you least prefer. The purpose of this being the following. So if you have, for example, 12 firms that you're applying to, maybe you divide it in 2 or 3 batches. You should first send out the applications and start the recruitment process with the firms that you're least interested in. The idea behind this is that as you advance through the process, you will get better and better. So you should ideally be at your sharpest with the firms that you most want. Plus, the fact that you might already land some offers with your maybe least preferred firms will already give you a lot more confidence that you can do this. You've done it already, so you can get more offers. And it's also a reality that they can always become your main offer if your primary target doesn't work out. So it's good to have this sort of sequencing and to do it in a way where your least preferred firms are at the start. I've noticed often that candidates actually send their application first to the firm that they want the most. But what ends up happening is that they interview with the firm of their dreams. It doesn't work out, which is not surprising because they don't have interview experience. They're not sufficiently prepared. And then they realize, oh, okay, so this thing is a lot more complicated than I thought. And then they start doing it properly. But it's almost like they missed out the core opportunity that they were targeting. Then there's also a point around reframing interviews. So you should see interviews as a stepping stone rather than a test. So try to keep a positive mindset, realize that you also as an individual, as a candidate, you're constantly improving. So you will get better with each interview. So then there's no point in trying to set unrealistic expectations or see every interview as a thing that will decide the rest of your life. This sort of pressure, it can be quite damaging, and for sure is not going to prime you to be in the best possible mindset. Then also time it. So apply early. It can take weeks for firms to get back. Get in touch with recruiters as early as you can. Develop your strategy as early as you can. It's better to, if anything, to start early and then postpone the interviews if you have to, rather than find yourself in the situation where you're given interviews that are scheduled in months from now. Then you should try to manage mindset. So as I was mentioning actually before, to use early offers to build confidence, to focus constantly on the advancements that you've made in your preparation, rather than trying to think of the gap that exists between you and other candidates, where you are and who you'd want to be. And last but not least, to get expert support. So working with a coach can help with developing the sort of roadmap and a development plan that is specific to you. So then you have a very solid foundation for application strategy. To me, this is very important. Now, when I was a candidate, it wasn't important at all. So I had no application strategy, and I went like a bull through the recruitment process, not like a very smart bull, however. So I basically just, I had the CV, I carpet bombed the entire consulting industry. Some things worked out. I got some interviews. I showed up. I tried to prepare as much as I can. I got some offers, not great ones. I ended up refusing them because I still had my interview with McKinsey. And by the time I got to my McKinsey interview, I had no offers because I had rejected the ones that I had received. And it was McKinsey or nothing. So in the end, I was more lucky than smart that things worked out. So now, having had this experience and having worked with a lot of candidates, I understand that it's important to set it up in a way to also manage, the statistical chances of things working out in your favor. Good. So moving on, the application package. So this actually, in terms of screening, is the most important thing, specifically your CV and your cover letter. I've seen over 500 application packages by now. I would say that 2% of them were ready to be sent out. So I said, this is good. Just send it out. It's great. It makes a lot of sense. The majority of them actually required substantial work. So let me tell you what I typically see and what great would look like. For CVs, usually the stuff that I see is that it's font size 9 to 12. It's up to 3 pages long. It's a summary of all the experiences of that person. It focuses a lot on what the person did. It includes lots of information, the courses you did in university, lots of detail. And it also includes technical terms and acronyms, aka smart language. Now, what it should ideally look like, you should go to font size 11 minimum. If you get to 12, awesome. It should all be on one page. Then in terms of the structure, you should basically have at the top education or professional experiences, whichever is most recent, as in if you have graduated from your school 6 years ago and you've been working since, there's no point in putting education at the top. It makes sense to put what is most recent. Then you should have leadership and volunteering experiences, and at the bottom, skills and interests. Then the CV itself should not be a summary of everything you did in your life. It should rather be the highlights of your impact. So a synthesis of your impact, the most important things that you've achieved. And each bullet point should be 1.5 to 2 rows long and should focus on what you did, how you did it, and what you achieved. So the quantification of impact is actually super important, and it's something that a lot of people ignore. You should also give an indication of your performance versus the cohort. So the standard thing that I see is that people put their GPA. But if we don't have an understanding of the GPA of the other people in the cohort, then the GPA standalone doesn't say anything. Because maybe this was just a very strong cohort. Everybody had the GPA. So there's not much that you can do about it. Then as a consequence, what you should aim to do is to get an estimate of your positioning within the cohort. So if you say, for example, top 10% of the cohort, that's a very different thing. And that's a lot easier to understand. And that's a lot easier than for interviewer, for a recruiter who's scanning your CV to appreciate. And basically, your objective as a candidate should be to create a CV that is very easy to read and that really allows the recruiter to spot specifically the things that they're looking for, which is that they're trying to figure out whether you're a person who has always made an effort to be at the top of their field, and they succeeded, who has a wide range of experiences, who has a long-term interest in consulting and maybe experience in consulting, or at least professional experiences in jobs that share the same skill set with consultants. Also that you've had some experiences of being a leader and even maybe of giving back to your community, so regarding volunteering. And then things like your skills and your interests are more to get a sense of you as a person and what you're focused on. So as a last point here, it should be breathable, it should be easy to understand, and it's easy to scan visually. Then, in terms of the cover letter, so the cover letters usually that I see, they're designed by the candidate to be sent to all the firms. So they're generic. They usually have 1 or 2 typos, and they have a font size of 9 to 10. So you really need to lean into your laptop to read them. And they represent a collection of everything that the candidate did. So it's basically the CV in long form, which is why many firms, and McKinsey is often doing this, they no longer ask for the cover letter, or they specifically tell the candidate, only send the cover letter if it's different than what you have in the CV, because they realize there's no point. Like the way the cover letters are being understood now is very different from what it's meant to be. And usually there's a lot of fancy language that's, again, seeking to impress. So ideally what you should do, you should have font size minimum 12. You should have it all on one page. You should start by expressing interest for the role. Then you should follow up ideally with 2-3 impact stories that align with the values or focus of the target firm that you have. So almost like mini paragraphs that try to connect what this particular firm claims to be important for them on their website, for example. You try to connect that with some of the experiences from your past. So for example, maybe you have a firm like McKinsey, and one of their let's say one of their values is your individual responsibility to stand up when you don't agree with something and to express your opinions. And then you can think of a story in your own experience where when you did that, and that indeed had an impact on the project that you were working on, or had a positive impact on the people around you. So it's important then to connect these two to show that I belong to you, to your group. I share the same values. I've done similar things in my career that align with your way of thinking. Then after you've done these impact stories, then you should then do the motivation to join that specific firm. So this should be really, really catered. And in terms of how to express your motivation for that specific firm, try to avoid saying the stuff that, again, is just on the website. Try to, for example, don't say, I would love to work for McKinsey because I could do projects all over the world. Great, but there are lots of consulting firms that do this. So this is not really specific to McKinsey. Or the chance to work with large companies across all industries. Again, not specific to McKinsey. So try to figure out what is it that's specific to that firm, and then speak about that. If you don't know what's specific to that firm or what you could talk about, this is an amazing opportunity for networking. And we're going to discuss this in a second. So try to connect with other people who are in that firm and try to get an understanding of what's important for them. And then as part of your application and the cover letter, you could mention having talked with these people and explain how your conversation with them changed something about the way you think about this firm and is now strengthening your motivation to apply. Then you should make sure that the cover letter is 100% tailored to the firm. You should tell the story of you beyond the CV. So try not to rehash anything that was mentioned in the CV, and you should have it proofread. It should be plain and easy to understand in terms of language. Good. Then moving on. So in terms of networking and referrals, referrals are not a must, but they can significantly increase your chances of passing screening. And it's always super interesting to see this from the perspective of a coach, because referrals are something that everybody aspires to. Candidates obviously aspire to referrals because they significantly increase their chances of passing screening. Recruiters love referrals because they're almost like a tap on the shoulder, telling the recruiter, hey, I know this person, I think we should invite them to an interview. No need to dig deep into their application. So it makes their job easier. And consultants also love referrals because if your referral converts into an actual offer and you start working there, then they get quite a good bonus, you know? So in a way, everybody wins. And yet somehow, this is one of the things that everybody struggles with, or at least nobody looks forward to when they're in the application process. So what I want to focus on today is explaining how to leverage something like LinkedIn to get referrals under the assumption that your brother or your father or your mother are not McKinsey or BCG partners. Yeah, so you don't have this sort of network already within your reach. So then it's about you having to create everything from scratch. Yeah. So how do you create everything from scratch in terms of getting a referral? By leveraging LinkedIn. So you should first of all prepare a LinkedIn profile. Have a professional photo, have a headline description, make sure that your work experiences matches to reflect what's in the CV. Once your profile looks like all the other profiles, this is what you should be aiming for, to just have it look professional and normal. Then you could move into the next step, which is around searching and adding target contacts. So you should use LinkedIn's search function to identify profiles from your target firms. And ideally, they should be people of a similar seniority as the role that you're applying for. So if you're applying for a business analyst role or an associate role, there's no point adding all of the partners within the region. There's a lower likelihood of them actually accepting the invite because most likely they're very busy. LinkedIn is not a priority for them. Plus, then there's a lower probability of them actually getting on a call with you. So try to get people around the same seniority. It's easier. There's already something that connects you. Then aim for people who ideally have less than 1 year tenure. Recent hires tend to be a lot more excited about their role and about the story of how they got into the firm. So then they also have a lot of fresh information on the recruitment process. So it's great to talk to them because you understand exactly what they did within the last year or so to basically get this job. And it always sets you up for an amazing conversation. They also tend to be more humble in general because they've just entered in the industry and they're very eager to share their knowledge. So the way I would suggest is that you try to identify profiles within the search function that have this criteria, and maybe they also have something in common with you. Try to see if maybe you can invite people from the same school that you studied in. Maybe you worked in a place that these people also worked, or maybe there's anything to connect you with them. Maybe you have connections in common. So again, this also helps. And then basically send a connection request to these people. Do so without a message. LinkedIn prompts you to send a message, but from the research that has been done, this actually lowers the probability of your connection getting accepted, because people don't like text, and the moment they see text, they feel like you're about to sell them something, so they just ignore applications. So just send the invite, depending on the strength of your profile, meaning how many applications how many connections you already have and how good your profile looks like. You have like a 20 to 60% chance of getting the connection requested. So quite a range, but basically a bunch of people will for sure accept your application. And on LinkedIn, you can send up to 100 connection requests per week. So try to maximize that. Again, the way you can do it is that once you have an overview of your target firms, you know where you want to get a referral, you try to look for these profiles for each of the firms, you send these applications. And then once you've done that, you will need to reach out either the next day after the connection has been accepted, or a couple of days after, with a message. Try to keep the message tailored, try to keep it short, try to highlight areas of overlap, and to also suggest a 10 to 15 minute conversation. Don't have questions in the message, because it creates work for these people. So they now have to sit down and type answers for you. Try to provide time slots of when you could speak, and try to provide a phone number. This all these things are meant to just lower the barrier for that person to actually reach out to you. They can understand the message in a glimpse. They see when you're available. They can decide whether to already suggest to you a time out of the ones that work for you, or maybe if they have time to just pick up the phone and call you. They see that this is not going to take long. They see that you're normal. They're like, okay, let's just help this person. And if you are unsure about how to write this message, feel free to reach out to me and I can share a template. Once again, this is important for me in terms of how to do it, because I also attempted to do this and it didn't work out at all for me as a candidate, because I had no idea how to do it right. So what I did is that I basically went on LinkedIn, and again, I tried to just send a message to 20 people maybe. I don't think that I had anything in common with them. I believe that I wrote a rather long message. I believe that I had a lot of questions in my message. I don't think that I actually asked them for a call. I wasn't even thinking about getting a referral. I just wanted to understand more about the process. So I basically did the opposite of this, and surprise, surprise, people accepted my connection request, but nobody really answered. So then the way I took this is that, okay, well, this is unfortunate. I'll just try to manage without. And then when I'll be in consulting, I'll just speak with everybody that contacts me. And I did this. So out in 5 years, I spoke weekly with at least 1 or 2 people. And this is just meant to tell you that it might seem discouraging that you are sending messages to all these people and many of them won't answer, but some will. You will need to just find that person and you need to keep going. And it's a certainty that some people will answer. I know that I was doing this with everybody. I know colleagues that were doing the same. You just need to find the equivalent of these people. Then once they've seen the message, they responded, you can set up a call. Make sure that you research them before the call, and on the call try to ask questions about their experience, not answers you could find on Google, but answers that questions that are related to their specific experience. So once again, for example, if they're recent hires, you can ask, okay, but how was the recruitment process for you? What was the most important thing in your preparation? What do you think made you successful? How are you finding your job? What do you wish you knew if you were in my shoes now? Is there anything specific for this particular office that you're part of and that you also would be happening to apply to that I should adjust in terms of how I prepare for the interview here? So all of these questions that are really tailored to the specific person and tailored to you, they're not things that you could have answered on Google. Yeah, so just try to connect to these people and have a conversation. This will be super important in how they relate to you as well. If they're people with more experience. So maybe they have a couple of years of in these firms. Try to see them as people who are ahead of you on this career track by a couple of years. So these are people that have accumulated quite a bit of experience by now, and trying to get some key learnings from them could really accelerate your own growth. So you could ask them, look, I am just starting in this industry. You've been doing this job for 4 years. Again, if there's one thing that you would suggest, you would tell somebody like me who's just starting in the industry to focus on, what is this thing? And this sets the discussion on a very positive tone, because it allows these people to reflect. It makes them think of their own experience. It makes them feel like they're sharing important advice, and they are managing to contribute to the well-being of another person. So this is like an amazing conversation that you can have. And even if you don't get a referral, it can be life-changing. You know, I've had, for example, conversations when I was in McKinsey. One of the last things that I did in the firm is that I conducted this sort of study on the well-being of, it was an internal study, it was right before I was leaving in the last month or so, so I was trying to take things easy. And it was, I was interviewing senior partners and partners across Europe. So these are people with like between 13 and 30 years of work experience in McKinsey. So these are some of like the most experienced people in the industry, like the 1% of the 1% in the world. And I got to basically have a half-an-hour conversation with them, and I would ask questions like, what is the most important thing for you that you focus on, or in the way you operate? How do you make sure that you have the most impact that you could have in a day? You know, all these questions which are fundamental, and you get a glimpse into how these people operate. So see this experience as a gift in and of itself, referral aside. Good. Then let's assume that all of this goes well. You focus on the connection, you have a nice chat, and then you get to the end of the call. And what you're after, of course, is the referral. And in a very elegant way, make sure that you're not too direct. So say something like, now I understand that at the moment, consulting firms are especially selective with whom they invite for interviews. How critical is it to have a referral when I apply to office X? This is as far as I would go. So basically, you're bringing the topic of referrals and placing it in front of this consultant. If they don't proactively offer a referral at this point, move on. This is it. So you just need to find a person who will. They know that in the majority of cases, referrals help. And most people can give referrals. So if they choose not to do it, this is their personal choice. It also doesn't reflect on you. It doesn't mean that the call went badly. It also means that they're just super busy. This is not a priority for them. It's not something that they usually do. Maybe they have, they require that they know this person in depth before they give a referral. So it doesn't reflect on you. Just move on, have another conversation. Again, thank them politely, remain in touch with them on the network, and that's it. And the thing is that you should see this entire process as a funnel. So the same way consulting firms maybe take like 100 candidates and take them through this process. At the end, one gets the offer. Now try to think of you sending 100 connection requests, getting 40 connections accepted. Out of these, maybe you send messages to all of them. 10 respond to the message. 4 get on the call, 1 gives you a referral, and that's it. You just need to create a sort of funnel, and it's certain that it will work, statistically speaking. It is quite a bit of work, but many things that are difficult, and it takes time to do them right. But if you now use this sort of system and you work through it in an efficient manner, it actually goes rather quickly. Good. Then, fourth area, in terms of interview performance, obviously, it doesn't only matter to get to the interviews, but also to perform well in order to get an offer. So now you shouldn't aim for good anymore. You should aim for great. Of course, I can't possibly tell you in 2-3 minutes what are the things that you need to do in order to pass the interview. This is what I work with candidates on across several sessions, and across, well, them taking many hours of individual practice to achieve this. But I just try to synthesize once again, what are the core principles for you to focus on? So start early, first of all. Usually it takes 2-3 months for candidates in terms of prep time, in order to be in good standing for the interviews. I often see candidates who contact me, hey, I'm really desperate. I have the interview in 10 days. What can we do? We can do a lot of things. And I mean, for sure, I can help you a lot. And for sure, you're going to make a lot of progress and accelerate during this period. But what would have been a lot greater, a lot better, is if we talked 2 months ago, because then you would have had a clear plan of how to advance with your preparation. You would have known what to focus on. You would have been less stressed in a much better state for the upcoming interviews. You would have maybe had interviews already with firms that would have preferred less, but would have consisted of great practice for you. So make sure that you start early with the process, because it's quite unpleasant to then have to reach out to recruiters to postpone. However, since we're in this point, in terms of postponement, the majority of candidates are very reluctant to postpone interviews. They see it as something that reflects badly on them. They see it as being unprofessional. Realistically speaking, yes, it's not great to postpone interviews. Recruiters don't like it because it consists of additional work. What they've done is that they have been in touch with you to get a sense of your availability. And at the same time, they've been connecting with interviewers, so consultants. They've been exchanging emails with them, trying to figure out when these people are free so they can connect them with your availability and find slots that you both agree with and have in your calendar. If you all of a sudden decide that you no longer want to do that slot, then they have to redo this process. Of course, they don't like it. However, once you're past screening, recruiters don't really have a say in you getting the offer or not. It's the interviewers who do. So realistically, even if the recruiters find you annoying, them being annoyed won't decide whether or not you get the offer or not. So if you have to care for yourself, then always postpone if you don't feel prepared. I've worked with candidates that have postponed 3 times and they still got the offer. I've worked with candidates that have postponed 5 hours before the interview. This was a candidate that was in Korea. We somehow spoke, started the session when it was 3 a.m. for him. And he realized that he was nowhere near prepared, and his interview was in the morning at 9. So he sent the email right after the session. They obviously didn't like it too much. He apologized a lot. He explained the situation, and then he managed to get another 6 weeks for practice. But basically, always, if you're in the situation where you don't feel you're ready, don't just go to the interview. It's a waste of time for everybody involved. It's a waste of an opportunity for you. It's a waste of time for them. So nobody wins. Yeah, don't do things out of shame or guilt, because it doesn't set you up for success. Then second, focus on quality over quantity of practice. So don't try to do, I've done 5 cases today. Ooh, amazing. Try to do 1 proper case per day. 1 proper case means what? Take 1.5 hours and eliminate all distractions. Be super focused. Do your absolute best. Simulate interview conditions. Read the prompt, read the question, attempt it on your own, then read the answer from the casebook, for example, and so on. Or maybe you do it with the case partner. But even more important than this, make sure that you take 10 to 15 minutes at the end to reflect on what went well in that case, what didn't, why, and what you can be doing differently next time. So it's almost like you're trying to give yourself feedback, to synthesize the feedback in a way that makes it operational for you. And this sort of reflection exercise, it's what actually allows the knowledge to cement. When I was practicing, again, I wasn't doing it good at all. I was doing a lot of cases. And I was doing a lot of cases because I think it made me feel like I was working hard and I was making a lot of effort. But it's a bit like people who don't know how to swim, and I'm one of them, they just try to move a lot in the water, you know, to stay afloat. But somehow they end up sinking more because the technique is bad. They're not, you know, a lot of movement doesn't necessarily guarantee that doesn't guarantee progress. You know, sometimes it can create more issues, like it just drains you, or it helps you develop bad habits. So instead, try to see each case as a building block. And instead of trying to do 100 cases in your preparation, try to do 30 or 40, but proper. Like each of them, you can still remember it and you know what you've learned from it. Then also make sure that you over-index on what others ignore. So for the PI, the personal fit part of the interview, this is something that unfortunately candidates ignore. So they usually start practicing for like a week before the interview. From my experience, I recommend that you start at least a month before the interview. To get the stories right is actually quite complex, and in order to get there, to get the delivery as well. And majority of candidates don't understand the expectations from these stories. So it's also one of the reasons why, funnily enough, more candidates end up failing the interview because of the PI than the case. And it's just a reflection of how they prepare. The average candidate spends 90% of their time preparing for the case and maybe 10% of the time preparing for the PI. So then for the case, they do fine. They get some feedback, but it's like, okay, it's borderline. And then for the PI, it's like a complete disaster, you know? So what you can do to position yourself better than other candidates is to actually overemphasize the PI. So have amazing stories, and then this will elevate you in front of the interviewer's eyes. Then try to stay consistent. So set quality time aside each day, 1 hour to 1 hour and a half. Make sure that it's not at the end of the day, and you do this practice whenever you're at your absolute best. So super focused. If you have it when you're super tired after work, after dinner, it's 9:45 p.m. Just go to sleep. There's no point. Like your brain is just, yeah, it's just not gonna set you up for a good learning session. So try to set time in your calendar either during the day when you feel like you have a gap when you can be focused, or try to do them early in the morning. But make sure that, of course, depending also how your learning style is, it's at a point when you're really focused and you can actually learn. Then mixed practice methods, so individual peer practice and expert sessions. Don't do only one. Remain positive, so always look for the progress rather than the gap. Mindset is super important in this process. And in terms of working on mindset, make sure that you know, you constantly, oftentimes you need somebody to do this with, a sort of expert or a professional, but you need to understand if you have any limiting beliefs about your performance. I've worked with people from all types of backgrounds, and I often come across people with like amazing profiles on paper, like top of the class Harvard MBA grad. And when you speak with them, they really struggle with confidence. So they say, I'm horrible at maths. I'm the worst at maths. And obviously, when I hear this cognitively, I know this cannot be the case. I mean, they're a Harvard top of the class MBA. So they've went through so many tests. For sure, they're at least average cognitively in terms of maths, but they've surely developed some very unhealthy limiting beliefs. So then I work with them on actually changing these beliefs. And if you don't have the opportunity to work with somebody on this, try to do a bit of introspection, figure out what are the things that you believe about yourself that you find are maybe limiting your performance, and then go for a long walk and figure out how you could change these. Last but not least, if you do get expert support, get it early. As I was mentioning before, don't get a coach in the last week before the interviews. Many candidates think that they should do absolutely everything that they can and then get a coach at the end to like do the fine tuning. But this is a bit like me. I'm going to take the swimming example again because I don't know how to swim. It's like me signing up for a swimming competition in 3 months from now. Going swimming myself almost every day for 2.5 months. And then in the last 10 days, I go to a coach and I tell him, you know, I have like a competition in 10 days. How can I win? Well, it's a bit difficult to win. Like we'll try to do our best, but ideally you spoke with me 3 months ago. So it's very important to actually get right from the beginning an understanding of what is the right technique and how you should be practicing. And this doesn't mean you need to do more sessions with the coach. If you wanted to do 1 or 5 or 10 or 20 or however, you can do as many, but just make sure that you have one right in the beginning and then you space them out throughout the preparation process. And this will ensure that the way you prepare is really catered to you and that you constantly get to adjust your focus in terms of practice to what matters at that point, rather than just trying to boil the ocean, do everything, and then get expert support right at the end. Last but not least, so the enabler, working with the coach. I did not get a coach when I was practicing, and I know that it's a reality that many people get this job without the coach. I think this is a certainty, but it's also a certainty that only 1% of the people who get who apply to these firms get the job. And what a great coach does is that it takes you from a 1% chance of getting the job to 60 to 100% chance of getting the job, depending on the coach, depending on what they focus on. And realistically, they do this at the cost of less than half of your first salary. So if you think about it this way, in terms of value proposition and the doors that it opens, it makes a lot of sense to work with a coach. It's not really a cost, it's an investment, and it's a strategic investment that increases your chances significantly. Plus, for me as a coach, what I see as important in working with all these candidates is my opportunity to teach and share what I've learned as a McKinsey consultant for 5 years in terms of working with other people, thinking to a problem and so on. And these things go beyond the interview. So it's the value that you get in terms of personal development, not in the fact that you got a job. I mean, of course, for the candidate, the most important thing is that you get the job. But for me as the coach, the thing that I feel I am offering is what goes beyond the job. But basically, if you're considering getting a coach, what I would suggest to look into: optimize for quality and connection, not cost. So realistically speaking, the difference in cost is not huge between coaches. So make sure that you really work with somebody that you click with and that you respect and trust. Do an intro call with them. There's no need to commit directly. Check their reviews, look them up online, look out for how long they've been in consulting. If they haven't been long in consulting, then I'll start asking some questions as to why and why are they qualified to be coaching. Then try to also get an understanding of some coaches who are good at sales and the people who are great at coaching. There's a big difference. I mean, somebody who is able to convince you to work with them is not necessarily somebody who is good at making you get the job. Yeah. So of course that's difficult for you as a candidate to tell, but yeah, I guess if they're a bit, yeah, I'm usually just a bit skeptical of the people who are a bit too pushy when they try to sell me something, because yeah, I guess if they are good enough, then their product would sell itself. Anyway, this is just a personal opinion. So let's skip past that. Get their input early on, as I was mentioning. Then you should see it as you being in the lead and they supporting. So use them as an advisor or vehicle. Don't expect them to babysit you. You shouldn't do that. I mean, there are some that offer this, but I wouldn't recommend it as a way for working. And offer tailored approaches. So the value in working with the coach is to work with somebody who's a human and connects with you, and they understand who you are, what you're specifically good at, what you're specifically struggling with. They have you on their mind and they're there for you at all times. Not somebody who basically tells you, watch these 10 hours of videos and then we speak, or we do a session and then now watch these other 3 hours of videos, because that is not coaching. That's an online course, and that's actually significantly cheaper for you to get anywhere else on the internet. Yeah, so try to once again optimize for the mentorship relationship. This is what you should be investing in. Good. Okay, so we are almost done. I hope you found this useful. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them below. You can use the QR code to schedule an intro call with me. I usually work with candidates for 1-2 sessions without an intro call, but people who want to work over a longer period of time, so to have a proper mentorship relationship and to target the recruitment process together, I like to meet them beforehand because I don't take all candidates. I try to really work with people who are positive and determined, and in which I believe that they can really make a change, not only in the recruitment process, but also in the industry. I hope you found this useful. It was a pleasure delivering this, and I hope to hear from you soon. Ciao.